Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Church Times webinar organised in conjunction with Modern Church, entitled Can a Good Death Be Assisted? My name is Elaine Graham. I'm Chair of Trustees of Modern Church, and I'm chairing our discussion this evening. We'll be hearing in a moment from a panel of experts, Joanna Collicutt, James Woodward, Katie Tupling and Cassius Francis, who will each be offering their own perspectives on this issue. The panel will also try to respond to some of your questions. Thanks to those of you who've already submitted something in advance, but we're encouraging you to share any further comments as we go along in the chat, and we can feed those through to our panel. But before I introduce the panel in more detail, it may be helpful to offer some background to our discussion. We're meeting, of course, on the eve of a debate in the House of Commons, when a private member's bill on assisted dying will be presented by Kim Ledbetter MP. And we're putting up a link to the House of Parliament webpage to this legislation. It's called the Terminally Ill Adult End of Life Bill, so you can see the provision in full detail. If it becomes legislation in its current form or adapted form, this bill will, I quote, allow adults who are terminally ill, subject to safeguards and protections, to request and be provided with assistance to end their own life and for connected purposes. What are those safeguards and protections? That a person is over 18 years of age, judged to be terminally ill, with a prognosis of less than 6 months to live, with a clear, settled and informed wish to end their own life. Permission must be given in writing by 2 medical practitioners who must be independent of one another and ratified by a judge. Clearly, there's a lot at stake as MPs consider how to vote on this. And many of these questions have been discussed in the media and elsewhere already. Some of those questions include what the potential consequences on any seriously or terminally individual might be. Will they feel under pressure to take the option of assisted dying for fear of being a burden either on their loved ones or on the health service? Also, what might the indirect implications of such a bill be on those who already live with chronic illnesses or disabilities? What effect might the legislation have on healthcare professionals themselves, on the doctor-patient relationship? For example, will there be a conscience clause for those who choose not to participate in any procedures? And will the procedures, legal and medical, around assisted dying divert resources and attention away from other forms of end-of-life or palliative care? But finally, of course, there are fundamental questions of moral and theological principle as well. One term that features prominently on all sides of the debate is the idea of human dignity. But in this context, what exactly does that mean? And what values underpin our understandings of a good death or a good life? So before we proceed with the panel, a couple of other things to say. As you'll see on the screen with me is Anna Smith, and welcome to her. She is a British Sign Language interpreter, and we'll be pausing at various points in the discussion to give her a chance to have a break as we go along. Secondly, clearly this whole question is one that affects all of us in many different ways. It's a complex and emotive subject, and of course we will be doing our utmost to respect that and to proceed with sensitivity in all our conversations. So that's by way of introduction. Let me introduce then our first panel member, Joanna Collicutt. Joanna has a background in clinical psychology and the psychology of religion. Until 2020, she was Carl Jasper's lecturer in psychology and spirituality at Ripon Hall, Cuddesdon. And she is Oxford Diocesan Older People's Advisor. It was in that capacity that she became interested in the way the church responds to questions of mortality, including its own mortality. She has produced a number of books, including Death and Life, A Church's Guide to Exploring Mortality, published in 2024. Joanna, welcome. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Elaine, and hello, everybody. Like many at this time of year, my choir is preparing a performance of Handel's Messiah. There's a real risk of charging through this piece with the vocal equivalent of hobnail boots. And for one chorus in particular, our conductor keeps telling us, remember, his yoke is easy and his burden is light. These are, of course, words of Jesus from Matthew chapter 11, where he contrasts himself with the religious leaders of the day who weigh the people down with their demands without, quote, lifting a finger to help them. I think the established church needs to take note of that. Our track record on ethical issues always seems to have been computer says no, followed after a period of delay with concessions to the inevitable. We're in danger of being perceived as inflexible, morally oppressive, driven by what we take to be divinely ordained abstract principles, lacking in compassion for people who are in desperate and intractable situations, and unwilling or unable to listen properly to their voices. And anyway, we have currently lost the moral high ground. That's why I'm sympathetic to many of the calls to offer the option of euthanasia for terminally ill people facing different sorts of agonizing death trajectories. They want peace of mind, and we preach a gospel of peace. I've been alongside many people in this situation, first nursing cancer patients and then running clinical psychology services for people with degenerative neurological conditions such as motor neuron disease. But I am not in favour of the bill that is currently before Parliament, and that has not been a finely balanced choice for me. There are many reasons that have been rehearsed by others. Its rushed timescale, the way it has been prioritised above improving resources for palliative care and the wider NHS, the lack of an impact assessment, the vagueness about the resources needed and the processes involved, including assessment of mental capacity, which was something that was also part of my previous clinical role. And I'd like to share just two experiences that have formed my view. First, from my clinical practice, with people who became profoundly disabled due to accident or illness. I learnt that we are very bad at predicting what our future selves would want. The scenario my patients imagined would be intolerable very often turned out to be not only tolerable, but dignified and meaningful. They would often reflect that their past selves would never have believed it. Second, from my current experience as someone who specialises in death-related ministry with older people, time and again, I've been alongside someone who has all their marbles, would pass any clinical test of mental capacity, but who wonders if, in addition to legacies, the best gift they could offer their families would be to do the decent thing and die. Several have asked how one goes about it. Coercion would not be necessary for them. They would quite readily respond to suggestion. And the reason that they entertain this idea at all is that they've introjected an attitude that is finding a foothold in our society, made chillingly evident during the pandemic. The attitude that some lives are more valuable than others, and that certain categories of person are better off dead. Even if all the practical problems with this bill were sorted out, and I'm not sure such a thing is possible, it embodies a cultural shift that's simply too costly for a civilized society. So on the basis of the greater good, I'd argue strongly against those loud voices promoting libertarianism. But for the reasons I gave at the beginning, I'd also keep listening prayerfully to the quieter voices of vulnerable people on both sides of the debate, because there may be a creative way through that is not evident from an entrenched perspective. Thank you, and back to you, Elaine.
Thanks, Joanna. Our next speaker is James Woodward. James is principal of Sarum College in Salisbury and a practical theologian working in areas such as health and healing, Christian ethics, old age, and end-of-life care. In 30 years of ministerial experience, James has worked in a range of contexts, including healthcare chaplaincy and rural ministry. His books include Befriending Death, published in 2005. And James, perhaps most relevant for our conversation this evening, you were a member of a previous Commission on Assisted Dying, chaired by Lord Falconer in 2012. And I think you also have some international experience of legislation elsewhere. So we look forward to hearing some of your experience.
Elaine, thank you. And it's very good to be with you. I share Joanna's plea to listen and notice and be attentive to the range of questions and feelings that this area of our living and dying gives rise to. We need to recover our relationality in this over and above our functionality, or perhaps even our legality too. But in order just to pick up some questions, I want to take you into three places which span some decades of my life, and out of those places ask one or two questions, if I may. So first of all, I'll take you way back before many of you were born in 1983 to St Christopher's Hospice. I had just graduated from King's College London with a degree in theology and went to work as a nursing auxiliary with Cicely Saunders, who was the medical director. As a nursing auxiliary on a ward, I got to know the patients very, very well. And in many ways, it was one of the most extraordinary shaping experiences for my intellectual and theological endeavors, as well as my pastoral work. And I remember one morning, a young woman, not a great deal older than I was, as I offered her some breakfast, and asked how she was, she said to me very clearly, "I'm fed up. I just want to die." I was unable, I think, to respond. I was so surprised at the force with which she expressed that. I went away and got her a cup of tea. The following morning, she was, of course, still there, and I asked her again how she was, and said, "I'm really sorry you were in a difficult place yesterday." And she said to me, "Well, that's how I felt yesterday. I feel fine today." So my first question is, what kind of conversations do we need to have in this area? And how do our feelings and hopes and fears and fantasies feed into the sort of conversations we have? They're not all objective, inevitably, as human beings. And we need to think about the basis upon which we are arguing for or against this or that. I'll run you forward very quickly to 2011. As Elaine said, I was a member of the Faulkner Commission, a very rigorous piece of work. We took over 350 pieces of evidence from people who came into the commission. And I, with another one of the commissioners, traveled to Zurich in 2011. And as part of seeing the legislation in Zurich, went with my colleague to the Dignitas Clinic, was warmly welcomed by the staff there, and spent some time listening to both the staff and those who are about to undergo the procedure. It had a profound effect upon me, and I still live with that profundity, and some of that effect shapes the way I look at this bill and the processes of assisting someone at the end of their life. And these are my questions within the Dignitas Clinic. Have we all got freedom to choose? What is the relationship between killing and letting go? And how do we deal with, as human beings, the fantasism of control? That we need control, we want control, and we will get control at whatever cost. Thirdly, and finally, I'm nearly finished, I want to take you to 2018, to my parents' house in just outside of Durham, and my mother, who had been living with dementia for many years. It had diminished her beyond recognizable comprehension. It was heartbreaking to see her pain, and the pain of my father and my sisters, who closely looked after her over that period of time. But in that fragility and in that boundedness, my mother and my family showed me what kind of conversations we need to have about living and loving, about living with pain and acute spiritual pain. It's a reminder, I think, and an invitation for all of us, and this is why this seminar is so good, that we need public discourse about death and dying, and we need, from a spiritual and theological perspective, to explore what these debates actually mean. So in the light of all of that, I'm deeply ambivalent about the bill, and I think, but I hope and pray that it might help us to have better conversations around the end of life. Thank you.
Thank you, James. We're going to have a mini break now of a minute to give Anna a breather, but please don't go away. We'll be back soon. Welcome back, as they say. It's my pleasure now to introduce the third of our panellists, Katie Tupling. Katie is the Diocesan Disability Advisor for the Church of England Diocese of Oxford and chair of the National Diocesan Disability Advisors Network. She's previously worked in the Diocese of Derby and Sheffield. She is co-founder of Disability and Jesus and was part of the organising group for a disability conference at Lambeth Palace in 2018. Katie, welcome. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you to Joanna and James for everything they've just shared and said. I'm really enjoying listening to them, not just being here as well. And thanks to Anna but hopefully I'll be slow enough. I'm going to begin by saying that I am a Church of England priest. Yes, you can have a dog collar and be disabled, so it's not an urban myth. We do exist. Cerebral palsy, diagnosed at 2.5. I'm one of the lucky ones because I am pretty mild in medical terms with my cerebral palsy. If I concentrate very hard, I can get away with pretending that I'm able-bodied in most gatherings. The crutches are a giveaway, but if I hide them, people assume I am able-bodied. Even if I reveal myself to be a disabled person in that gathering, I still come across as very much an able-bodied person with crutches. I'm one of those disabled people who manage fine. What you don't see behind the scenes is there's quite a lot of struggle. There's quite a lot of, I guess people call it pain. I just call it minor irritation, but I must have a very high pain threshold, and morphine helps. So I come across as the kind of disabled person that everyone's comfortable with. There are some nights when I'm sitting in my chair and I look at the 2 flights of stairs to get to my bedroom, ridiculous house, and I just look at them and think, do you know what? That could be a mountain, not just 2 flights of stairs, because my body just does not want to go there. Even getting out of the chair is a massive climb. And some of those nights, and I'll be very honest with you, I sit there and think, I just want this moment to stop. I just want this moment to stop. And if you ask me in that moment, I can make this stop, would you like me to? I would wobble hugely over the yes or the no. And I tell you that so that you don't think I'm just going to splurge a whole load of stuff about all disabled people are terrified it's going to happen to us and we're going to have it imposed upon us, and I've got such a privileged life that I couldn't imagine someone being in that position, and therefore I'm going to oppose the bill. Of course I am. And what would I know? I'm telling you that so that you know that I understand how you can get to that place where that offer is extraordinarily tempting. And I'm not the kind of person that the bill is designed for. I'm not in my last 6 months of life. I am not being judged by 2 professional doctors and a High Court judge to be worth this and to hit that threshold. But I do understand how you can get to that place. One of my best friends on the whole planet is called Val. Val is also a priest in the Church of England. Val is also someone who lives with multiple conditions in her own body. And Val and I are at opposite sides of this bill. Val has a very personal story about her own mother, which has completely shaped her opinion of the fact that we need a bill to allow this to happen. That there is a moral imperative around helping people to die who want to and are in that place. I don't think I can quite go as far as agreeing that there is a moral imperative, and therefore any law that tries to create a justification that is morally permissible to do that, I think is on shaky ground. But Val and I are great mates, even though we passionately disagree about this bill. My worries about the bill, other than can we actually justify that it's morally permissible to remove somebody else's life, is around culture. There is a culture in the UK, it's not new, but it seems to be more prevalent more recently, that if you are disabled or chronically ill, your life is somehow worth less than those who are not disabled and not chronically ill. A lot of politics since Brexit and since the pandemic seem to have ramped up the rhetoric around who has value, who is worth something in society, and who, quite frankly, is a burden or even a cheat, conning the system to live an easy life on benefits. Let me just assure you, it's really hard to get benefits, and I defy anyone to live off them comfortably. The charity Scope did a survey, and they believe that it costs the average disabled person around £900 a month just to have the same quality of life as their non-disabled peers. Benefits do not cover that. During the pandemic, the number of deaths attributable to people who had an underlying condition or disability was 6 out of 10. Those people did not die from their existing conditions, they died of COVID. But 6 out of 10 were disabled or chronically ill people already. DNRs, do not resuscitate, were given to patients as they arrived in hospital for whatever reason they arrived, simply because they already had underlying conditions. That was not an official NHS policy, but I tell you what, it happened a lot. You may say to me, Katie, that was a pandemic. Weird things happened in the pandemic. I know people who are still having DNR placed on their patient notes when they're being admitted to hospital for simple things, simply because they already have underlying conditions. The pandemic may be over, but the culture has not changed. Many disabled people already believe themselves to be a burden. I don't think I am. Well, maybe sometimes I'm a bit high maintenance. But I do talk to a lot of people who I mentor who have become disabled through accident or incident, who are grieving who they were, coming to terms with who they now are, and asking the question, what do I do? I'm such a burden to my family, to my friends, to my workplace. Who am I? And in that state of mind, something like this bill would say, we agree. There's not really a lot of hope for what comes next. And I say that because this bill doesn't really have any detail. It can be passed tomorrow, and after it's passed, then the detail comes in. And I would imagine that a year from now, that bill would suddenly start to read slightly differently, no longer just terminally ill, no mention of suffering or pain as it stands at the moment, but expand to become chronically ill, and then expand again to disabled, and then expand again. Once a loose bill is passed, anything can happen with its boundaries. Disabled people are also at risk of coercion already by society, by politics, by economics, and dare I say, by the church and theology. A poor theology that says, we'll minister to you, but we can't have ministry from you. You're the ones who need us, and not the other way around. And that sense of coercion, stay in your box, stay in your lane, stay where you are. Don't try and have too many visionary ideas about who you can be. And disabled people, without fail, have all heard someone say, oh, if I was in a wheelchair, I'd kill myself. We already have a culture that says to be disabled is to be tragic. And nobody wants that life. You'd be better off dead. Within that culture, I don't trust a bill that doesn't have any teeth, doesn't have any detail, is open to expansion, and is based on apparent compassion, but doesn't actually understand what it is to be vulnerable, to be coerced, and to be thought of as a burden. So from a disability point of view, I don't speak for all disabled people, but an awful lot. I really distrust this bill in its current form, and to be honest, in the current culture, in any form. Elaine, back to you.
Thanks, Katie. So to our fourth and final panel member, Cassius Francis. Cassius is a minister in the Wesleyan Holiness Church. He works as senior chaplain at Birmingham Women and Children's NHS Foundation Trust. He's also a church trainer with Loss and Hope, a Christian coalition project of the UK's bereavement, signposting and information website At a Loss. He's part of the Black Theology Forum hosted by the Queen's Foundation in Birmingham, and he's recently completed an MA in Practical and Pastoral Theology at the Nazarene Theological College in Manchester. Cassius, welcome. Over to you.
Thanks, Elaine, and thank you to Joanna, James and Katie for those thought-provoking presentations. As a minister within the Wesleyan Holiness Church, one of the things that I have done over the last week is just had some conversations with our ministers and members about how they feel about this bill. And I guess unsurprisingly, on the principle, there was some real clarity about how people felt, but I felt that it was important to talk a little bit beyond just the foundational principle. I will come to that, but there are three key aspects that I thought were important really to interrogate around the details of the proposed bill. The first one is around health inequality. The second one is around bereavement support. And the third one is around the importance of good quality palliative care. So let me start by saying, first of all, that I want to commend Kim Ledbetter MP for the work that she has done. I do believe that she's genuinely attempted to put safeguards in place around this bill for people who are vulnerable. And as we've heard from Katie in particular, may have real concerns if this bill becomes law. However, there are these three key points that I think are important to raise and for us to reflect on together. Firstly, regarding inequality, during the pandemic, it became very clear that the health inequalities across this country means that particular communities are disproportionately impacted and were impacted throughout the pandemic. As a Black minister, did a lot of work within my own community and others, talking to global majority communities who were disproportionately impacted. One of the results of that means that we are living within a context where there is a lot of mistrust, unfortunately, around our health services because of that disproportionality. And one of my concerns is that if this bill becomes law, it actually adds another layer on top of the levels of mistrust that already exists because of the disproportional impact within our health services. Secondly, in terms of bereavement support, I recognize through the bill that there's understandably a lot of focus on the individual and the rights of the individual to make a personal choice about ending their life. But one of the things that I recognize through my work supporting bereaved people, and as you may know, the reality is that the death of a loved one means not just the death of that individual, but the loss within a family, within a community. Now, I have to say, one of the things that I've found helpful with the conversations around this bill is that at least we are having more conversations or talking more about death and dying, maybe a lot more than we would do otherwise, because I would often describe death as one of the final taboos within our society and certainly within our church conversations. However, there is a distinct lack for me within the details of the bill that's proposed around bereavement support. Who is going to relay the information to the family of an individual who makes a decision that they want to end their life? How will that be done? Who will be involved? Has there been thought to increased resource and support through bereavement services to offer help to families who lose loved ones in this way? So the first issue I have is around the inequalities that I've mentioned. Secondly, bereavement support. And lastly, I wanted to say something about the importance of good quality palliative care. The question that we were asked to address for this evening: can a good death be assisted? Can a good death be assisted? One of my roles within the Women's and Children's Hospital on a weekly basis is meeting with colleagues who work in palliative care. And very often palliative care is labelled as for families thinking that, you know, the end is nigh for their loved ones, and yet the evidence suggests and actually shows that when professionals within the profession offer good quality palliative care to individuals, their life chances are extended, their chances of a good death increase. And so there is a question for me again around this bill and the importance of resourcing good quality palliative care within this. And so to come to the conclusion in terms of the foundational principle of the bill, as the Wesleyan Holiness Church, we seek to recognize and preserve the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death. And that's something that was reinforced in the conversations that I had with both ministers and members of our congregation in our discussions around this proposed bill. However, I recognize that whether the bill goes through or is defeated in tomorrow's vote, we will have to revisit the conversations around what it means for assisted dying. And I hope that going forward we will be able to equip and continue conversations with our congregations and communities. And to conclude, what I would say is one of the reminders that came through the conversations that I had with our ministers and members over the last couple of weeks was the scriptures from 1 Timothy chapter 2. We will be praying for all of our leaders, for all of the MPs that will be voting tomorrow, that they will make their decision with diligence and with the best interest of all citizens of England and Wales in mind. I recognise that for many of them this is a very difficult decision, but our prayer is that they will make it with the right decision, the right thoughts in mind for all of the citizens of England and Wales. And why I stress that is because it shouldn't just be about the loudest voices or those who take up the airtime, but all of our citizens. Thank you. Back to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Cassius. We're going to take another short break. When we return, I'm going to ask each of the panelists whether they'd like to make a response to anything they've heard from any of their colleagues, but then we will start taking some questions and comments from you. So do please keep those comments and questions coming in the chat, and we'll see you in a minute. Welcome back. We're going to be joined now by all our panellists, and I'm going to ask each of them in the order that they first spoke, whether they've got any comments or responses to make. In particular, I think perhaps the issue that Cassius has just been raising about the kind of provision that's currently given for bereavement support and for palliative care, whether you feel that is a dimension of this debate that we really should be thinking more about. So does anyone of you want to respond? Maybe Joanna, is there anything you'd like to respond from what you've heard?
Just to say that I agree with Cassius, particularly around the area of bereavement, having supported a number of people who have lost someone to assisted suicide in Switzerland, that it's really complex and perhaps has not been given enough attention. I hadn't actually joined up those dots until I heard Cassius talking about it, but it's really vital to think about that and include it in our deliberations.
James, any comments?
Just to add my voice to that, I mean, I think it's really very important to remind ourselves of significant health inequalities that exist across the geography of our regions. We do need a huge investment and reinvestment in palliative care, but also, and Joanna and I have worked on this, a reorientation around the way in which we think about and support older people in third and fourth age.
Katie?
Yeah, I mean, a number of people have suggested that we follow the model of in Oregon, who are getting it right, who are doing it well, who have passed that law and have seen enough time pass to say that it's been a good thing. What worries me slightly is what we're missing is the narrative that of half the people who elected for assisted suicide in Oregon, part of the reason they gave was they felt like a burden. So I'm slightly worried that as a country we're saying we're going to do this because other people have done it, they've gone ahead of us, it's worked really well, but they're missing the other side of it, which is some of the fears that we're expressing already that have now been realised in those other countries. Yeah.
Cassius, any further comments?
I would just say that one of my concerns, as I was alluding to before, is that the focus will, with this bill and presumably with a huge amount of resource, will go into, if it is passed, thinking about assisted dying and everything that is associated with it, all of the staff that will need to be involved, all of the provisions that will need to be in place. When actually, as James has rightly said, I think the picture of palliative care across our nation and its quality is very patchy, and I would say that we'd be better served actually focusing on creating more good quality palliative care across the nation.
Thanks. A number of you have said how you're speaking from experience, and we have a contribution from Wendy, who is again writing from lived experience of chronic illness. So thanks to Wendy for posting in the comments and also for submitting a question in advance. And she says how she's disabled due to ME and chronic fatigue. She's in constant pain. As a Quaker, she believes that life is a gift and we should try to live it to the full. But she also believes that everyone should have a right to do what they want with their own life. Why do so many church leaders think they have the right to make a decision about whether I can end my life when I've had enough? And I guess behind that question too is that thing of saying, well, the best way of valuing myself, my dignity, my life is to grant me the choice of ending my life. How would any of you respond to that? Who'd like to go first?
With empathy.
Yep.
So we're quite busy discussing in the light of the fact we can morally justify someone ending their life under certain circumstances. What we're trying to discuss now is what legal provision can be in place if the desire is there and the threshold has been crossed, but they can't physically do it themselves, and they're going to need someone to help with that. And that person not being taken to court for murdering somebody. Under our current laws, you can't help somebody take their own life without going to prison yourself. But the step back is there a moral justification for ending life in the first place? And some of our comments, I'm loving all the comments. Thank you very much for everyone who's put something in there. There's a few that have taken the nuance of how can the Christian church tell everybody else what to do? Interestingly enough, I don't think any of our four speakers have actually mentioned particularly Jesus, God, theology, other than it being used against people. So it's been interesting to see this. We've gone from an underlying assumption that, of course, there is a justification that people can take their lives, and if they get to their own threshold, absolutely. But how do we create laws to help people do that, and should we be? I'm still not convinced that anyone's answered the question, is it okay to end life intentionally? So I'm kind of wobbling that we've gone a step beyond where we should be discussing in the first place.
Okay, anyone else on that question of autonomy to decide whether you take this path as being really the best way of valuing human dignity?
I think I would just say no man is an island, and therefore it's well, you have empathy for each individual story and each individual life. And I personally don't have an issue with assisting people to end life well as a given principle. The whole point about ethical dilemmas is that you have to play off multiple interests and come to a solution that is the least worst for everybody concerned. And I think the process of trying to increase individual autonomy can have, for some people, can have a massive cost for others. And it's that, I think, that we're trying to negotiate in terms of things like equality of access to healthcare for certain groups, the value of living for certain groups, and so on.
Thanks. James or Cassius, anything further to add on that one? James?
I think there's a dilemma about whether a perplexing problem about whether we can reach ever a pain-free existence, and what pain is in its complexity and multiple connectivity with ourselves and the world we live in, and so on and so forth. So I'm not justifying pain, but it's a very complex area of our human living and dying. I think I'd want to open that up a little bit. Whoever we are and whatever our journey is. I think the other the other element is that we do and are the whole genius of the health provision that we have in this country is to attempt to support and care, which means alleviating pain through palliative care, which means there is some assistance at the end of life in the process of that exercise of palliative care. So, sorry, just break. The problem with the bill and the language of debate is there are too many binaries. Thank you.
Yeah. Cassius, anything to add?
I think where Katie started with the empathy, I appreciate that. When we're discussing an issue like this, sometimes we can miss the personal stories, and I'm really sorry to hear about the pain that person is experiencing. And when I talked to members of my own church, people shared quite intimate stories about caring for loved ones at the end of life, and their experiences of that. So while I can't say that I understand personally, I hear your pain, and I pray that you get access to the support that you need.
Katie.
Yeah, just to come in on the pain thing. I mean, this is why I have such a dilemma with. I intrinsically don't think it's okay to end life, and at the same time, I'm typical Anglican fudge, isn't it? Terrible. And at the same time, I have a overwhelming empathy for the people who are in that position to go, I just want it to stop, because pain is a weird thing. Most people who've never experienced any pain don't want to, and that's very reasonable, because pain is rubbish. But also at the same time, pain is a marker that something's not right. So you pay attention to it, and you say to your body, why are you in pain? What's going on? Can we fix the thing that's causing the pain? And at the end of the day, I've got arthritis in now one hip. Thank you for a hip replacement. But I'm still on morphine for the other hip, which has still got arthritis. And, I'm not going to take any more morphine than I'm currently on, because morphine is quite dangerous. And it still hurts. So there is a certain thing about pain that you can't actually always eradicate it. Should we try and eradicate pain? Yes. Is the reality of being a human being that pain exists? Yes. So it's very, very complex. And what slightly concerns me in the bill, as it stands, is there's no reference to suffering, to intolerable pain, to when everything has been exhausted and there's nothing left. It just feels too woolly and too loose, and I worry that woolliness and that looseness partly means that people can then tailor it after it's been passed tomorrow, if it gets passed, but also boundaries could be expanded beyond tomorrow. And those two are a huge tension for me, that I worry about hugely.
Thanks. We have a comment from Suzanne, who says that medical science has advanced so much that a person's life may be prolonged more than nature might have intended. She asks, when is advancement not in fact progress? Are we seeking to advance life beyond what is really possible? Anyone want to respond to that? James, would you like to kick off? It's up on the screen now.
I don't know enough about the statistics and the whole picture around making a judgment about the advancement of life to make an objective judgment. I do know that in my work with older people and the culture of the place of older people, is that in that advancement there is and can be great gift. I am not romanticizing or idealizing or justifying pain at its acutest. It's terrible, and all of us experience it to varying degrees in different times. But if modernity has given us longevity, of course it will have its shadow sides and its limitations, but also it may also yield gift and opportunity and insight and life. So, but this is a conversation that needs to take place within the narrative of our meaning making. It's not, I think, a conversation that can be controlled or directed by law and medicine alone, which is what, final thing, is why I think those of us who are part of Christian communities and religious organizations ought to take a lead in having more reflective conversations about the complexity of life, of boundedness, of pain, of death, of living and meaning.
Thank you. I wonder whether there's time for just one final question, and I'd like to take one from Julie Francis, because she's writing from an experience of being an Anna chaplain, a chaplain to the elderly, people of the fourth age. And she asks this, the job of the church is to offer good, spiritual, loving care. Often these people feel, as they approach the end of their lives, they are a burden, both physically and financially. Is this a concern? And what can healthcare professionals, the churches, chaplains, and so on do, perhaps to ease some of those anxieties? And as many of you have been saying in the process of our conversation, reach a sense that people are valued regardless of their financial or social status. Katie, I think you were saying this really in your opening comments, that we often undervalue people who live with chronic illnesses or people who are approaching the ends of their lives. So what can we do to create better value for those people?
Could I say something about that?
Yeah, sure,
in churches, I think there is a kind of youth cult that we need to be careful about, which is underpinned by anxiety around our own mortality. And that the mark of a successful church is never described as having loads of old people as part of the congregation. Yeah. And so our culture as churches really needs to take seriously the things we've been talking about theoretically, which is the value of all people, including the aged. And the thing that distinguishes the fourth age is that these people live with pain and disability, which is actually a human problem, not just a problem towards the end of our chronological living. So I think as churches, we really ought to intentionally embrace a love for the whole lifespan and not get hung up on certain generations.
Thank you. Anyone else like to respond to Julie's fourth age question?
I think it's a really helpful point, and my background previous to ordained ministry was in youth and community work, but I agree with what Joanna just shared. One of my reflections is that culturally we've got work to do in recognizing the importance of elders within our communities. You know, all of those individuals who are what's the description of the fourth age, will have stories about life, will have wisdom that they're able to share, that are important to maintain within our churches and congregations. So perhaps there is more work to do on us recognizing the value of those individuals as part of our churches.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, and so we're going to have to close this webinar. I'd like to thank the panel, James, Joanna, Katie, and Cassius, for their contributions, and also those of you who submitted questions and comments. Sorry we couldn't take more due to lack of time. Thanks also to Anna, our BSL interpreter. I hope in the course of this evening we've been able to do justice to the very many points of view that are represented around this very complex issue, and that we've been able to shed new light on what is a very serious and challenging issue. And I think whatever happens with the reading of the bill tomorrow in the House of Commons, as you said, particularly Cassius, we still need to be doing more thinking. We need to keep thinking, keep listening, and think more about what we mean by a good life and the quality of life, and what it means to live with these issues. So we'll close now and we'll say goodnight. But as we finish, you'll see information from the Church Times about forthcoming events. So please stay tuned. Thanks and good night.